Welcome to the Refuge Podcast, where we cultivate our faith in the shelter of God's Word. I'm your host, Jennifer Elwood. I am so excited to bring you season 2 of the Refuge Podcast. Have you ever asked the Lord to bring to mind a word of the year? This has been my practice for the past 7 years, and this year it didn't come very quickly. And I think that's because I was striving for it. When I finally allowed myself to actually rest and be in Jesus' presence with no agenda, on New Year's Eve, the word quietly slipped into my consciousness. So, for 7 episodes this spring, we are going to discuss what biblical rest looks like across a variety of topics with guests who are learning to embrace this practice of rest as well. My prayer for us is that at the end of this season, we will be better equipped to come to Jesus, to lay down our weariness and burdens, and enter into the rest that He gives us when we seek unrushed time with Messiah Jesus. Welcome, everyone, and I am so excited to be here for the 2nd season of the Refuge Podcast. And I'm just really excited to introduce my guest to you. Her name is Liv Dooley. We connected in a Facebook group for Christian communicators moderated by Courtney Richard. And as I was scrolling through a post of shared links a while back, I happened upon her podcast, The Best Kept Secret, and listened to her latest episode, which was all about a book that changed both of our lives. We both fairly recently discovered this book, Sacred Rest, Recover Your Life, Renew Your Energy, Restore Your Sanity by Saundra Dalton-Smith MD. And, I'm speaking for both of us. God used this book to change how we approach and experience rest. And I want to tell you all about it. So welcome to the show, Liv.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
I am just so excited to have you here too. So let's start off and chat about sleep. For the most of my life, I pretty much equated sleep with rest. And I thought that was like the epitome of, if I get enough sleep, if I take naps, that's real rest. Like my body is completely shut down. And I learned opening this book that is in fact a biological function, and that rest is really something else. And she writes that, Dr. Dalton-Smith writes that sleep is solely a physical activity. Rest, however, penetrates into the spiritual. Rest speaks into the daily storms your mind, body, and spirit encounter. Rest is what makes sleep sweet. And that just calls to mind the scripture about sweet sleep. And so Liv, how did this affect you, learning this fact?
Oh my goodness. I just could not get over the fact that she said that rest, or sleep rather, sleep is passive. I was like, wait, what? Because it's a very active part of my life. I sometimes have to make myself go to sleep. And she talks about how it's passive because your body will take it, whether you choose to give it to your body or not. And this is why people fall asleep when they're driving, or fall asleep inadvertently during other times that they had not planned. And it's rest that actually helps you to become more active and enjoy your life more. One of the things that really struck me was the client that she had come into her office. And as they listed all of the things that she was going through at the time, I was just like, oh my goodness, that sounds like me. So even though I'd heard of this book years ago when she first released it, I suppose I didn't need it until now. I had come to a point in my life earlier this year where I was doing the things, I was setting the boundaries, I was going to sleep, and yet I was more exhausted than I'd ever been when I awoke. And so I happened upon a podcast where they referenced her book, and I went back and searched for everything from her because I was just like, I can't believe that I have been sleeping and I am still tired. This makes absolutely no sense. And it was really defeating. So
yes. Yes, I know. I felt the same way. I'm like, wait. And then, and it's so interesting because then as you start to unfold these different areas of rest, and then that's like, it kind of like brings it all together. Like, oh, wait a minute. If I take care in all of these different areas, then the sleep will be good. I probably don't need as much maybe as I think I do. And that God can really do a lot with like our obedience to lay down, right? And close our eyes. It has been a very interesting journey trying to figure all this out. And that, walking in and thinking every day now about like, okay, where am I depleted? And how do I actively rest in a different way is like really, changing how I put together my day. Because it used to be like, I need to do this, I need to do this, I need to do this, I need to do this. And now in the middle of that, like, oh, that's a 4-hour block of work I have planned. How am I going to rest in like a creative rest way before I pick up my kids so that I'm not just totally drained?
Definitely. I've learned to listen to my body a lot more since having read this book. And I think that has been one of the biggest transformations within my life, because even though I will sometimes push the envelope and work a little bit longer than I should, I have found that when my body begins to, give me signs that it's time to stop this. It's time to go sit down. It's time to, do something else, that it's trying to help me. It's on my team.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. So the first area that she talks about is physical rest. And she begins this chapter with this quote: "The body tells its story in stillness. In stillness, we can recognize when movement is no longer serving us well." And so, I am realizing like, oh my gosh, that's why we need like recovery after workouts. And that's why we need to stretch. That's why we, all of these different things. And that has really like just tweaked my perspective. I always think like, I understand the physical rest part of things, but I'm not super good at it. Don't like really take the time to, I think I've gotten better at that. But anyway, how have you changed in your ability to take physical rest?
I think the biggest thing for me is the awareness of the need for a nighttime routine. It's something that she shares, and she really gives these practical steps that you can take to implement at the end of each chapter. And that's one of the reasons I love this book. It's one thing for somebody to tell you you need to rest. It's another thing entirely for them to tell you how to rest. And so she partners both of those together just excellently. But I have just become more aware of the need that our body has to kind of settle down, especially from a day that's been active and overstimulated for many of us during a great part of the day. And so, that bedtime routine just includes some quiet time, a shower, just slower movements so that I don't even feel rushed. Because I would say before having picked up this book, I was rushed to get into bed. It was just like, oh, I got to go to bed because if I'm going to wake up at this time, I have to sleep now. And it was almost like this great race every single night to get into bed, which, as you can imagine, is counterproductive, because after such anxious, hurried behavior, your body now has to take more time to settle down from that.
Mm-hmm. Yes, I've been like bugging my kids and my husband, like, they do this thing called pillow fight at night. And I'm like, is this really helping them get ready for bed? It's like, oh, it's helping them burn energy. And I'm like, you guys aren't starting it early enough. Like, it needs to start it. Like, it needs to be an after dinner thing, not oh, your pajamas are on, so we can play pillow fight. I'm like, oh, come on. But I mean, I've learned a lot from that. It takes them a long time to settle down. And the same with me too. And I've noticed as well, like with getting back into working out, and now that the gyms are finally like, open again and all that kind of stuff, realizing that when I go in and work out, that I can't just like get off the elliptical and get in the car and leave. I need to take some time to stretch and let my body settle before I move on, because otherwise we run the risk of hurting ourselves really by not slowing down enough to counteract any kind of, physical activity. And that's especially important when we're getting ready to go to bed, so that our sleep is sweet. We need to, kind of pull back a little and make sure that we're like slowing down enough. I love that. So the second area is mental rest. And she describes this as quieting cerebral back noise. It is your mind's comfort zone. And this has been a challenging one for me. I bet it has been for you too. So how has your perspective changed in this area?
So this is actually what I found I needed most during that time, where I was just looking for resources, asking, why on earth am I still exhausted after implementing these other areas? And I found that I was incredibly overstimulated. I was listening to podcasts and sermons and Bible studies all day long. I was constantly taking in new information, and it was really causing my brain to, just go into overdrive. And one of the things that I was most astounded by was that she said that 2 of the signs that you recognize you are overstimulated and you need some mental rest is that you have begun to critique yourself a lot more than usual. You just become a lot more negative, and you deal with escapism, which I have a friend who in college would always ask me, what's wrong now? And I would say, why? Why do you say that? And my friend would tell me that anytime something was going on in my life, I would always start talking about new places I could travel to. And so even to this day, when I get super stressed, I start talking to my husband. Okay, where can we go? When can we take another trip? But I had to learn how to really quiet my mind, because at this particular time, I wasn't able to take a trip. I wasn't able to escape. And the self-critique was only self-defeating. So I started turning things off. There was a period where I began to stop listening to podcasts beyond a certain time. So I might listen to one during my drive to work, but I wouldn't listen to one during lunch. I wouldn't listen to one once I'd gotten home, in contrast to having them played in the background all day long.
Yeah.
From there, I stopped listening to as many audiobooks. I stopped listening to as many sermons just because I had so much going on. But I found that I almost had to peel a layer back each week so that I could recognize, what was really causing me to feel overstimulated.
Yes. I have recently decided that like for Sunday, like one thing that I'm going to do on Sundays is, unless there's something that comes up, I rest like from all social media. It doesn't get turned on. I don't turn on my computer, and I try and spend like a little bit more time outside, or, just doing other activities with my family or something, but not plugged into anything electronic. I don't listen to podcasts. I don't, I'll maybe listen, I'll go to church and I might listen to another sermon, but am finding that if I have, but you're actually speaking to me right now. I'm just like, oh, I've kind of been binging on podcasts lately. I think I need to shut that noise down a little bit more, because it just taking in so much information at once is just like, you think, oh, I'm learning. Oh, this is a good, noble thing that I'm doing. And I'm going to be better at this and better at that because I'm taking, but if you take it in too much, then it's just too overwhelming. And then your mind's like, oh, wait, well, this podcast said to do this, but this sermon said to do that. And now what do I do? And you're like overthinking stuff. And yeah, finding times to shut that off is like huge. So anyway, the third area is emotional rest. And, this can be a really raw area. This is about hiding emotions and not dealing with them. And probably all raise our hands and go, it's me. And she makes an insightful comment about this. Hiding looks like rest. It shields, protects, and covers. But unlike rest, hiding drains. It pulls apart and separates. Rest rejoins. It is reunion with your best self. You before the hiding, you before the shame. That cuts me deep, because I'm like, oh, what junk do I have sitting on the shelf that I need to start taking down and dealing with? So with all that said, how have you found to take emotional rest in a way that's actually dealing with stuff?
Definitely. My hiding, I guess, was definitely a form of overperforming. And she talks a little bit about that, but I would say that the point that she made, which is hiding drains, is just true of all of it. Whether you are, playing small and trying to push others forward and acting as if you're humble and, all of that, and I don't say that lightly, I've dealt with that as well. That's what I think of when I think of hiding, right? Like pushing other people forward, or you are overperforming. It all drains you because it divides you, to her point. This chapter, like all of them, we're going to beat this horse. It was incredibly helpful to me because it helps me to get ahead of some of the areas and issues that I was dealing with. I have the opportunity to speak here locally across Las Vegas, and I'm incredibly grateful for those opportunities. But I do notice that at times when I feel anxious about how someone's going to receive me, I begin to overperform. And it's real. And it doesn't even have to be in areas and spaces where I'm speaking. It could even be in those areas and spaces where I'm just showing up to support others. But it almost feels as if, well, you have to be on, because then people are going to think that something's wrong if you're not, when in reality, nothing's wrong. I'm just, a little uncomfortable with how someone might receive me. And so I was able to get ahead of some of that. Now that the world is back open, praise the Lord, I had the opportunity to go to a couple of conferences. And I was able to really think about this chapter and think about how it was that I wanted to show up and what is causing me to act inauthentically, to overperform and all of that. And I really feel like I was able to show up in a way that was authentic to who I am, and just the opportunities that God has brought. So.
Oh, that's really good. I feel like every area like that, you start to, having to talk about yourself, being in positions where you are, speaking and, putting stuff out there on social media and all of that. There's this constant tension that, that you're like, but I need to look like this. And God's like, but really, you're like this. So why don't you show up like this? Because this is how I made you.
It's so true. When I speak, I tend to make a lot of facial expressions. And so I was really worried worried about how that might be received at one of my speaking engagements. In prayer, I decided to actually just tell them that. And so I got up on the altar and said, okay, guys, just so you know, my face is going to do all this crazy stuff. And it doesn't mean I'm mad or I'm yelling. It just means I'm super into what I'm saying. And everybody giggled and laughed. And we were all able to just recognize, where the other person was coming from.
Yes, I love that. That's so funny. Yeah, I had to get up at the last speaking engagement that I had to get up. I had listened to the sermon. The pastor preached on the passage that I was speaking on, and some of our cultural background information was a little bit different. And but it was perfect because I got up there and I was like, so I feel like that, but I was in this mental, emotional battle about what do I do? What do I do? What do I do? And just showing up and being like, hey, so this might not work for you, or maybe this will, but hey, I'm just going to lay this out like that eased tension in me.
It did.
And I think it also they would have noticed, the detail was just shared, and it's not it wasn't like some, big, salvation issue or anything like that.
Right. It frees you to enjoy the opportunity that God has brought, the people that he's caused you, to speak into without doubting yourself and taking away from what the Holy Spirit wants to do, because you're so consumed with how you are being received and how you're appearing. So yes. I love that.
Yes, I know. So good. We learn all this, constant learning process, just constant. Anyway, so the fourth area is spiritual rest. And in the book, she says, the sanctuary where we lay down our fight and rest. Mm-hmm. And in this process, we find our way back home to a relationship with God. And I just love this idea of laying down our fight. So what does your spiritual rest look like differently since reading it?
Yeah, so I definitely think that this one is contingent upon where you are in your life and what season you're walking through. As I mentioned, I have been really active, sharing the messages that God has given me, as well as writing. And so what I came to find is that I just wouldn't know what to do during my devotional time, because we hear all of these, messages about how our devotional time should be set apart from the time that we spend preparing for others. And I honor that. But to be honest, I just didn't know what else to study, what else to invite the Lord to speak into. So when she said that it may be time for you to explore your relationship with God again, and to remember what it was like when you first fell in love with him, and to just enjoy getting to know him again, I found a lot of peace there, because I love to study the Bible. I love to break down the Hebrew and the Aramaic and the Greek. I love to go deep into the word. I could talk about it all day long with other people, but I found that I would not have much to say when it was just that private time with God. And so I have been in a season where I have just been getting to know him all over again. And that even speaks to that feeling that we have to overperform when we're hiding. I do believe that I brought some of that into my relationship with God. And it was like, okay, Jesus, first, we're going to spend 10 minutes at the beginning of the time reading this devotional. And then I'm going to invite you to speak into that space. And then after that, we're going to spend 20 minutes memorizing. It was just so defined. It was so structured that I appreciated the time in my life that I needed that structure. However, I don't need that same structure anymore. I actually need to just be. I actually need to feel him just sit with me, or, just to listen to some soaking worship and not feel like I need to be on all day long, including the most intimate relationship I have outside of my husband.
Yeah, right. I know. It's like, I feel like this almost speaks to like the romance of Jesus. And it's not something that is, something that's talked about because it feels maybe a little weird because of how we equate that word in, society right now. Yeah. But it is something that he is doing. And romance is surprising.
Yeah.
Romance doesn't have a schedule necessarily, unless the schedule is you're going to the park, you're going to this, you're going to get engaged, and then, or something like that. Right. So, and so I think that just really speaks to, I love that because I feel like I have kind of gone through the same thing as well, where, God led me into a season this year of reading the Bible in 90 days. And I was like, well, that's going to be a lot of work. And God's like, or it can just be like our time together. And I felt like I just recently finished and I've started reading smaller chunks again. And I'm like, oh man, I'm going to do this more often. Like this is the first time I've ever done that, but I'm going to do this more often because I just really felt like a more intense connection. I felt like, even though some days it felt like a chore, it's only for 3 months. Like it's not that long. And I just found that like throughout the day, I'm like, oh yeah, I haven't finished. So I'm going to sit down and I'm going to do this. And it was kind of a weaving throughout the day. And that was so good. And so, I have a totally different take on all of that now too, because I mean, part of it was just being led into this very, more intense, like on paper, it looks more intense, but really it was just, it was being romanced. It was, just showing up and saying, you know what, Lord, we're going to spend an hour together in your word at some point today, and it's going to be amazing. So, yeah. So the next area of rest is social rest. And she describes this as finding solace in one another. And if you're feeling alone and isolated, detached from loved ones, are more attractive to people who mistreat you, and prefer online interaction to in-person, I'd rather just be sitting in a coffee shop with you right now, by the way. Yeah. You're likely experiencing social rest deficit. And this is about maintaining quality, close social relationships and having boundaries around relationships that need them. And this is an unusual concept of resting to me, but it's one that I have more embraced now for sure and have thought a lot more about. And so how do you practice social rest in your life?
So I am an extroverted introvert. So I'm outgoing. I can strike up a conversation at any point about anything with anyone, but I'm introverted in my deepest nature because, being an introvert is all about where you get your energy from. The same as being an extrovert. Extroverts tend to get their energy from being around people. Introverts tend to get their energy from being alone. And I could be alone all day long. I, however, tend to overlook the need to be around people because of that very fact. And so what was interesting was I went to probably my first conference this year and had a blast. I saw so many people that I'd not seen in person in years. And I just felt as if I was living my best life. However, in the time leading up to that, I had some anxiety because I knew it was going to be a lot of people around, a lot of people that I'd not seen for years since the world had kind of been shut down. And I would not have believed that I would feel so good after leaving that time. It was a women's conference, so we were spending time together in the Lord, and it was just enjoyable. breaks were as enjoyable as the time that we spent in the word. And I was really surprised. So it wasn't until I read this chapter the next week that it all began to click. I was like, oh,
yeah,
you actually do need people to help you, enjoy life even more fully and more completely, regardless of whether you feel that you're introverted or extroverted, regardless of if you feel you need to be around people or not. We all have this innate need to be around people. And that goes back to what the Lord said in Eden. It is not good for man to be alone. It's just not good. And so there are times I feel like we can get away from that. And we can even, begin to distrust that, depending upon some of the experiences that we've had in the past. So when we find that we've begun to just question the word, it's time to invite God to speak into that and into our relationships so that we can just explore his truth again. Because man, friendships are so good. And there's so many verses in the Bible, particularly one in Proverbs that says the sweet friendship refreshes the soul.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, after I read this chapter, I was like, okay, what am I missing in this area? And I'm like, I haven't actually just had coffee or lunch or anything with one person at a time. And I'm like, oh, this is a problem. And so I'm trying to make sure that I am actively scheduling time with friends, just one-on-one, without kids, without, all the extra, because I feel like it changes the space and it changes everything. And it's not the same as, even connecting with them at church or something like that, because there's all these other people around, there's distractions and just this focused one-on-one time. I mean, that's why we date, right? We don't want to spend time with, a guy or, our husband with all these other distractions around all the time. I feel more connected, to my husband after we've had a date, because we've left the house, we've said goodbye to all the people and said, okay, and now mommy and daddy get time together so that we can refresh, and maybe that'll help us be nicer to you or something, right? So, I feel like that has been a huge thing for me too, and realizing that I was missing something that I feel like I was getting that in a way because I was doing a lot of this kind of stuff where I was chatting with people online and going, wait, no, that's all online. And that's not in person, it's a different kind of space. And, I can't just fly to Las Vegas or fly to Michigan or Illinois or wherever, these people are all the time. But making sure that I'm investing in the people that live around me is huge too, for sure. And that's something we all need to remember as things are opening up again, that we really need each other. Yeah. So that next area is sensory rest. And this is another one that took me by surprise. So I'm 100% sure if I had decided to write this book, just I don't think I have the background to have opened up things this way. This is so phenomenal. I would have piled it in with mental rest. But it is different because it's removing external distractions. I mean, this other stuff is all the internal stuff, but now you're talking about removing the external so that gives peace to the internal. And she writes, when our senses continue receiving incoming information without a break, the nervous system becomes too congested to process the information appropriately. The result is a decline in happiness, stifled creativity, mental restlessness, and blunted performance. Yikes. Oh my goodness. So what does that look like for you to rest in that way?
I think this one is all about unplugging. And I have had to literally leave my phone in one room and just walk away from it. That is what helps me to unplug most of all. And when I do, then I do find that everything else is richer, that you're just able to be more present, that you're able to enjoy those friends and family members that are up close and personal, even more effectively and fully. And so I have, gotten back to a place where I just really enjoy being with my husband again. And pandemic was a lot of time together, but I really enjoy being with him again. And I enjoy being with him more when I unplug from my phone, because I found that when I have my phone around, I usually give that a priority, and I almost treat him as if he's a nuisance. I'm a little bit snappier. I'm a little bit less patient with him, because it's almost as if he's interfering with something more important instead of the opposite. And so when I unplug, I'm able to prioritize those things that really matter without the distraction.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. I have, and I talked about that with having every Sunday and just being like, I'm not going to be paying attention to my phone unless it, actually rings, or, we're trying to coordinate, a play date or something. But yeah, I have found that if that phone tends to be like, but this is happening, so now you have to leave me alone so that I can get this done, and realizing like, oh, well, maybe I just can wait for another minute or two, give you the attention because you're standing right here in front of me. And then we'll move on. And then I can check things when my people in front of me are like settled and satisfied and all that kind of stuff. So.
And what I'm learning even now is that I have to kind of reincorporate some older technology into my life, because our phones do everything, that it's really easy to become dependent upon them when, say, an alarm goes off. So the alarm does help us to recognize it's time to do something important. However, now that we picked up the phone, we see we have all these other notifications, and now we're, checking those. And so I've even had to recently begin to, find old alarms or old timers and stuff so that I can go to other things instead of just my phone.
I'm like, I need to get a digital timer. Like put
they still make them.
Because it's true. Like you think, I'm just going to use my phone for this, but then once you pick it up, then if there's stuff on there, whether you really need to deal with it right now or not, you're like, oh no, there's 4 texts. What is that? Oh no, there's more emails. What is that? Oh no, and so then you're sucked in. I found that like, even when I'm working on something like on my computer, I have to completely shut down browsers, and I take notes of the things I want to look up, because even in the process of like opening Bible Hub or something, still, I mean, that's like a good thing. And you'd think, well, I want to do that, but it just leads me down a rabbit trail that gets me distracted. And so often like that'll happen. Or if I accidentally leave Facebook open, it's like, oh no, what happened to the last 10 minutes? So just like really cutting down those distractions just helps with that external to the internal. And it just like, it makes such a big difference. So we are on our 7th and final area of rest, creative. And she describes this as soaking in beauty and light. And I just think that is lovely. So this is immersing ourselves in creative beauty. God has provided this to us so amazingly. And I think we only need to like step outside and we can find something beautiful to rest in. And it helps us to rest from creating ourselves and enjoy the creation that He created. And I think it's a teaser also for what's to come. When we go outside and we just enjoy the beauty that God's created, we can be reminded that we are returning to a forever garden. And so this is another area that I really needed to understand. And as a Christian creative, like I spend a lot of time generating and creating. And I'm guessing that you do too. And so how do you creatively rest?
Oh my gosh, this was definitely one of my favorites for so many reasons. It pretty much, I guess, what is the word that I'm looking for? It helped me to justify all of those feelings that I need to get away. I'm like, see, babe, we do need a road trip because my body is telling me we need to go to the ocean. So I really enjoyed just learning that we do have a need within us to, just enjoy nature. I live in Las Vegas, so I'm here surrounded by a lot of mountains, and that's always nice because we can go on a quick hike, but it does take a little bit farther, a little bit more time to get to the ocean. However, I can now appreciate it in a new way because I feel as if those feelings that I'm always more creative, I'm always rejuvenated when I come back from the ocean or from the mountains, were just, justified and helped me to really recognize why it is that I feel that way. Mm-hmm. It also helped me to, just, I guess, prioritize it more appropriately as well. And so one of the things that I loved about this chapter was that she even talked about building sabbaticals and purposely planning to enjoy creation. And for me, I found that I didn't enjoy my Sabbath as much because I found so much enjoyment in my work that it almost felt as if the Sabbath was pointless. It almost felt as if the Sabbath was just a drag because I would end up doing things that I didn't like. A lot of times I will cut off social media during a Sabbath, but if I hadn't planned to cut off social media for that particular day, I would find myself endlessly scrolling during that time because I was bored. And so I actually found a lot of freedom in this chapter because she teaches us that it's okay to plan your sabbaticals. It's okay to plan your Sabbath. Now, of course, if something goes differently, then that's fine. Don't stress out about it. Right. But you can plan it just so that you don't have to, spiral into these unhealthy habits that you really are trying to get out of. It's so that you don't go back to that work that you're trying to rest from and all of that. I and my husband recently went to the mountains. We were so tired, but we just wanted to get away. It was hilarious because we brought the dog with us. So the dog was in the back seat of our SUV and we're in the front seat. And we pulled up to one of our favorite trails overlooking these beautiful mountains that still have the snow on them. And we kept saying, okay, I'm going to get out in just one moment. And we just fell asleep in the driver and the passenger seat of the car. And we decided to take a nap. And so our nap was like an hour and a half, but we would just wake up and look at the mountains and then go back to sleep. And we never did hike. And it was the most amazing time ever. So that was one of those times where I planned out our time for the day, but it didn't go according to plan. And it was every bit as refreshing, and if not more, than it would have been if we'd spent it hiking.
Yes, I love that. Sometimes then you plan your Sabbath, you plan your rest, but then you realize your body's telling you, like, I need something a little different. Like, thank you for taking me to this beautiful place, because now I'm just going to close my eyes and be okay with that. And oh, yeah, I absolutely love that. Well, this was so fun. And I feel like I'm just like, I need to talk about all of these kinds of things more. Like, we need to find the army of the people to read this book and really understand, how to put our lives together in a better way. where we plan our activity and we plan also and are aware of how much we need rest in all of these different areas, that does eventually lead to sweet sleep, which is just a precious, precious thing.
Yes, yes. I'd love to invite you and any of your listeners that want to come into the Facebook group I host. We're actually going to be leading a book study on this book. And anybody that wants to just jump on, the Zoom with us and share their thoughts about how it's touched their lives can. So we're all just going to encourage one another this summer to practice rest so that we can feel refueled when we go back into the school year.
Oh, that is so good. Yes, that will be in the show notes. I think I'm signing up too. And
yes, we need you as a moderator.
I'm down. And oh yeah, I love this so much. I know I've been thinking about that too. I'm like, I should offer this book, but I'm so busy with all these other things. When am I going to do it? But you know what? Yeah, I'm in, because I think that these kinds of conversations need to be happening regularly, and that we're constant, that we're evaluating how, really what we need and what God is calling us into, because it changes.
It changes.
So before we sign off, Liv, it's just kind of funny to talk to you about someone else's book. And I think that we need to send Dr. Dalton-Smith a letter together, see if she'll come be a guest on a 2-part interview, half on mine, half on yours. That would be super cool. But you yourself are an accomplished author and speaker and facilitator of this amazing group. So can you please just tell us a little bit about what you are up to in your ministry?
Yes. So many things. And I'm just so grateful to connect with others like you. You keep me inspired and accountable to continue resting and to continue just enjoying relationship. And that is actually what the ministry that I lead is doing this year. So I lead a ministry called the Colorfully Candid Paradigm. And we just, like to talk about everything in light of God's truth. But it started out as a program for young ladies ages 11 to 18 and their mamas and mentors. However, since the pandemic, we've had a recent shift where we've really had the opportunity to encourage a lot more women. And that is the purpose for our Facebook group called The Collective. So we get together and we check in on each other, we encourage each other, we pray for one another, and we also host expert interviews, which we're going to be taking a break from so that we can get in some good rest this summer. But those expert interviews are all ways to help the creative feel more confident in communicating clearly about Christ. So whether we're building websites together and learning the necessities of those, or we are encouraging one another to just, purchase and hire the photographer to take the photos. We are just really enjoying getting to know one another and what the Lord is doing in each other. I am at Candid Liv, as well as Colorfully Candid on Instagram and YouTube. And it would be an honor to connect with anybody that's listening and wants to enjoy some accountability in this area, because it is incredibly important that we continue to defy the cultural standards of our day. And that includes getting some rest when the world tells us we should be working all day and night.
Yes. I completely agree. And also, can you talk just a little bit? I know you're kind of in flux with books, but that you have several books out there.
Yeah.
And so could you just talk a little bit about that?
For sure. So I started writing young adult fiction almost 10 years ago now, which is wild to even say. I think it'll be 10 years this fall. And I released 3 books in a series called the Colorfully Candid Diaries. So if anybody has any teenagers, any little sisters, daughters, granddaughters out there, these might be a great resource for them. And then I also wrote a book for women who want to begin to host events for girls and women. I just felt like I learned a few things, and we don't have enough, we're not in competition with one another, because there's absolutely no way that we could reach everyone. It's collaboration that the Lord has called us to. And so I just share a few of the things that I've learned since I've started hosting events. And then finally, the Colorfully Candid Paradigm brought out a book during the pandemic with 22 women called Her Story, His Glory. It's a series of MAD conversations, and MAD stands for Mother and Daughter Conversations. And we walk through different seasons in our lives where we had to really learn God's truth and how it is that we've been tempted to deny that truth within our lives, and how he brought us back to just recognize his goodness and his mercy that was always present with us in each and every one of those seasons, as we realize he knows better. We're using our stories for his glory to encourage others. So whether we dealt with issues of doubt or perfectionism, or we dealt with things that were much more intense at the hands of others, we share all of that with the hope and the prayer that it will encourage another woman, that he can use her story as well.
Oh, I love that. I'm like, okay, my daughter's 10 and a half. So like we're on the cusp of that. And I, we adopted her from Mississippi, and she, has this beautiful dark skin and looks, of course, very different from the rest of the family. And I feel like, oh, I need to connect her with your beautiful writing, and show her, like, every time, like, we just watched that movie about the mathematician, Katherine Johnson, Hidden Figures. And she watched like this whole group of, beautiful Black women walking together down the hallway to the computer lab, and she goes, Mom, they're all good at math and they look like me. And I'm like, oh my gosh, I love this so much. Like, I just, I want more of that for her. And so, yeah, I will definitely be checking out your resources. And if you are considering also, writing a book, launching a book, you've got some things in place. I'm going to have in the show notes, a little a book launch checklist, which is a great checklist if you're interested in that. And this has just been such a pleasure, my friend.
It has such a pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. Wasn't that a good word on rest? I hope you learned just as much from that interview with Liv as I did. So often we need reminders that scheduling rest is just as important as scheduling our work. Taking a scan of my need for rest is something I do regularly now, and I hope that your ability to understand and plan these different kinds of rest helps you immensely. I cannot recommend enough that you grab a copy of Sacred Rest, Recover Your Life, Renew Your Energy, Restore Your Sanity by Saundra Dalton-Smith MD. It seriously is a life changer. I also highly recommend following along with Liv Dooley's ministry journey as well. Information about her website, podcast, Facebook group, and Sacred Rest Book Club are in the show notes. Stay tuned for next week's episode. It's going to be so good. We are going to take a look at what biblical self-care looks like with my ministry friend, Melanie Chitwood. Thank you for listening to the Refuge Podcast, where we cultivate our faith in the shelter of God's Word.